During a severe winter storm in the Midwest, a woman welcomed a group of stranded soldiers into her establishment, offering shelter and warmth. The military's response the following day astonished the entire community. Could you sacrifice everything without expecting anything back? The fierce wind attacked the windows of Kingston like a wild creature. Horizontal snow transformed the landscape into a churning white abyss. The once busy highway, typically buzzing with traffic noise, disappeared beneath layers of frozen precipitation and eerie quiet. Within the restaurant, Linda Kingston worked with resolve, her visible breath evidence of the freezing temperature. The ancient heating system struggled weakly, barely generating any heat, yet she kept the establishment accessible. Dim lighting from emergency backup bulbs, powered by an old generator out back, illuminated the space. Shadows danced across the seating area where two truck drivers sat close together over tepid coffee, bundled in heavy jackets. Linda topped off their cups with experienced movements, her fingers chapped from exposure, though her expression remained composed and determined. A photograph of her father, decorated with a miniature stars and stripes, adorned the wall near the cash register. Robert Kingston, 1948 to 2012. Combat veteran from Vietnam, diner creator. The inscription underneath stated, "For those still serving, for those still driving, you're home here." She briefly acknowledged it before returning to prepare a pot of chili on the gas burner. Though unspoken, she recalled her father's words echoing in her mind. "Keep the light on, kid. Someone's always out there counting on you." The weather conditions deteriorated further. At approximately 7:15 in the evening, while she was serving soup, the entrance burst open with a gust of freezing air. Linda hurried to close it, then stopped abruptly. 12 military personnel stood at the entrance, their faces crimson and weathered from exposure, their uniforms covered in accumulated snow like frost on evergreens. Their commanding officer, a man approaching 40 with intense gray eyes and a white streak in his hair, stepped forward cautiously. "Ma'am," he said with a hoarse voice, "we're from the 302nd. Our vehicles became stranded approximately 5 miles away. All systems failed: engines, communications, heating. We spotted your illuminated sign from the highway. May we?" Linda interrupted by grabbing towels from behind the register and tossing them to the closest soldier. "Come inside. Remove your wet clothing. Position yourselves near the kitchen area. It's warmer there." The soldiers paused, surprised. "I'm not requesting," she continued, approaching them with unmistakable authority. "Move." She directed them toward the industrial cooking equipment, now emitting a faint glow from the kitchen's corner. Individually, the soldiers settled into various chairs, their gloves releasing steam as warmth penetrated their frozen bodies. They attempted to communicate, offering payment, expressing apologies, providing explanations. Linda dismissed it all. "The meal is ready. Don't question it, just consume it." She presented everything available: chili, cornbread, soup, sliced ham from her depleting freezer inventory. The soldiers consumed it wordlessly, the way only those facing hypothermia could. After they had begun warming up, one soldier, a tall man with a gentle southern dialect, indicated the wall display behind the register. "Is that your father?" he inquired. Linda turned, her expression softening. "Yes, Robert Kingston, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines." The gray-eyed commanding officer stood and approached closer. His demeanor shifted as he examined the framed military patch displayed beside the photograph. His voice lowered. "He served in Da Nang." Linda confirmed with 2 nods. "Returned after his initial deployment. Never stopped discussing the comrades he left overseas." The commanding officer released a slow, almost sighing breath. "I'm Jake Morrow. My previous commanding officer served with 3rd Marines. I was raised hearing those names." He pointed to a roster attached beside the photograph. Names of deceased soldiers Linda's father had insisted be remembered. "I believe my uncle served alongside him." An extended silence followed. Jake surveyed the space, his expression transforming. Respect, acknowledgement, perhaps something deeper. Linda interrupted the quiet. "The generator is failing. We'll maintain power for perhaps a few additional hours. Following that, we'll rely on blankets and shared body warmth." Jake acknowledged with understanding. "We've endured worse conditions." By 9 p.m., the storm had isolated the town completely. Snow accumulations reached 6 feet against the building's exterior. The electrical infrastructure flickered before dying completely. Linda ignited kerosene lanterns, positioning them throughout the warehouse behind the establishment, her emergency storage area. She opened the large doors and signaled for the soldiers and remaining truckers to enter. "We'll manage. We always manage." Inside, she arranged wooden platforms, covering them with cardboard and blankets. A dozen individuals huddled collectively, the cold penetrating through the concrete foundation. Linda functioned like a medical professional, distributing soup in plastic containers, refilling an old coffee urn with precious heated water. Jake assumed organizational responsibilities. He paired individuals together, examined for frostbite signs, bandaged hands with gauze. When a young enlisted soldier began shaking violently, he shared comforting narratives, stories about endurance, about men surviving harsher circumstances, about sweltering jungle summers and the comfort of rainfall. Linda observed him from the room's perimeter, her back against metal shelving containing canned fruit and outdated soup. She was depleted, her eyes stinging from smoke, her arms aching, her feet pulsating. Yet she continued. One soldier attempted to offer her damp currency. "No," she responded, gently returning it. "At minimum for the provisions." "No." Her tone remained gentle but firm. "You served. This is my obligation." Jake overheard. He nodded slightly, remaining silent, though his eyes conveyed everything. The storm persisted through the darkness. Yet inside Kingston Stop, warmth existed. Silence prevailed, certainly, but not the empty variety. This was the silence of survival, of appreciation too profound for verbal expression. Just outside, beneath a mountain of snow, a damaged road sign flickered beneath a frozen streetlight. Kingston Stop. Hot meals. Open late. Though barely distinguishable now, for those inside, it had completed its purpose. It had guided them home. The blizzard showed no signs of relenting. If anything, conditions intensified, the type of cold that penetrates bone and memory. By midnight, Linda Kingston had ceased tracking the number of headlights that appeared dimly through the snowfall before disappearing behind the establishment. Information had circulated, perhaps through trucker communication systems, perhaps through fortune, that Kingston Stop remained operational and warm. By 1 a.m., more than 30 individuals were inside. The warehouse, previously a quiet space for excess supplies and old furniture, had transformed into an improvised refuge. Linda had distributed every wooden platform available, every cardboard piece, every worn blanket that once lined the old diner's seating. Improvised sleeping areas occupied corners, soldiers pressed closely against truckers. A Labrador retriever someone had rescued from a rest area was nestled beneath a coat pile, its tail tapping weakly. Linda operated mechanically, filling containers with soup, dispensing water, monitoring anyone appearing too pale or too quiet. Her boots created wet snow trails across the linoleum. Her fingertips were raw from exposure. Jake Morrow had become her assistant. He didn't issue commands like military personnel typically do. He moved quietly, monitoring pulses, securing a tarp over the rear loading area to obstruct wind, instructing a young trucker on warming his hands without risking frostbite. Linda discovered him kneeling beside a wheelchair-bound veteran, adjusting the man's scarf as though it were completely natural. During the brief calm intervals between responsibilities, they conversed. Initially not extensively, minor topics, weather forecasts, mechanical failures. But around 3:30 a.m., as the storm shrieked just beyond the steel walls, they sat on inverted crates near the ovens, enveloped in silence. Jake initiated conversation. "I was in Fallujah. The first occasion we encountered significant assault. My closest friend was 5 feet from me. Then he wasn't." Linda didn't immediately respond. The hissing pilot light occupied the space between them. "My father recounted a similar experience. He was in Da Nang. Said he ceased hearing gunfire one day because the screaming grew louder." Jake looked upward. "What was his character like?" She smiled, though it was a weary smile. "He was haunted long before his passing. Never truly departed Vietnam. He established this place to reconcile with it. I believe he wanted to construct something indestructible. A secure location for truckers, for veterans, for anyone exposed to harsh conditions." Jake surveyed the rows of strangers now sleeping or resting on improvised beds. I'd say he accomplished his goal. Linda's eyes moistened. She blinked rapidly. Sometimes I question it. He leaned forward. You maintained operations knowing what approached. That's not merely duty. That's heritage. They remained seated somewhat longer in silence, each allowing the moment's warmth to cushion the external harshness. Yet, even warmth has boundaries. Just before daybreak, a ruptured pipe above the restroom exploded like gunfire. Water flooded across the concrete, freezing almost immediately along the distant wall. Linda cursed quietly and rushed to close the valve. Jake seized towels and began absorbing what he could. Anxiety spread through the shelter like a subtle breeze. A trucker mentioned his radio indicated the regional electrical infrastructure might shut down. A woman in reflective attire whispered that fuel lines were freezing throughout the county. Another individual reported observing ambulances trapped in snow accumulations back in Des Moines. The situation overwhelmed some. A teenage driver curled into a corner, shivering despite 2 jacket layers. One soldier began pacing, muttering they should have remained with the convoy. Tension intensified. Linda stood on a milk crate, her voice powerful yet calm. Pay attention. We possess heat. We possess shelter. We possess each other. If you're present, you're not isolated. We're going to survive this. Jake supported her, circulating among the group with reassuring acknowledgments and quiet reassurances. The fear didn't disappear, but it ceased spreading. Subsequently, Linda returned to the kitchen and discovered a note scrawled on a paper menu's reverse. Thanks for keeping the fire lit. BR. She studied the letters extensively. Her father's initials. She folded it carefully and placed it in her apron pocket. As morning neared, her strength began diminishing. She leaned against the preparation counter, eyes half closed. Her legs trembled, not from cold, but exhaustion. Jake noticed. You require sleep. I cannot. Yes, you can. 10 minutes. I'll maintain operations. She began protesting but recognized the sincerity in his face, the steadiness in his gaze. 10 minutes, she agreed. No longer. He assisted her onto a cot in the office behind the diner. She lay down fully clothed, boots remaining on, and closed her eyes. Jake stood in the doorway, arms crossed, observing the snowfall through the cracked window. Somewhere in the storm, assistance might be approaching or might not. But inside Kingston's stop, presently there was warmth. There were narratives. And within the narratives, there was life. The initial sound that interrupted the morning stillness wasn't wind. It was engines. Low, profound, and systematic. Linda Kingston awakened from brief, restless sleep in the office, her eyes opening sharply as the warehouse walls vibrated slightly, not from the storm, but from external movement. She jumped upright, boots already on, coat partially zipped. She entered the corridor. Jake met her midway. They've arrived, he stated simply. She followed him through the diner to the front entrance. Outside, the blizzard had diminished, but snow was accumulated heavily, waist-deep in areas. Through the frosted windows, she observed them, for camouflaged Humvees rolling in, heavy tires grinding against slush and ice. Behind them came 2 larger vehicles, green, armored, purposeful. A soldier descended and signaled for space. Another deployed a portable generator, and then the man himself appeared. Colonel Nathaniel Wolfe stepped from the lead Humvee like someone arriving in hostile territory. Broad-shouldered, with buzzed gray hair, his posture commanded immediate attention. His face was weathered and stern, his expression indecipherable beneath mirrored sunglasses. He didn't request permission. He strode into the diner like approaching a battlefield checkpoint. Who's commanding here? He demanded. Linda stepped forward without hesitation. That would be me. He assessed her, taking in her disheveled braid, stained coat, and reddened eyes. She met his gaze directly. What is this? He asked, gesturing toward the warehouse beyond. Some civilian relief operation? No, she replied, calm but pointed. It's a truck stop. My father constructed it. When the storm arrived, we didn't close. Jake appeared behind her. The colonel's eyes narrowed. Morrow, I should have anticipated this. Sir, Jake responded with respectful acknowledgement. Wolfe turned back to Linda, expression skeptical. You're claiming 30-plus civilians, a dozen of my soldiers, and a stray canine are sleeping on platforms in a storage area, and nothing's gone wrong. We've experienced frozen plumbing, 2 anxiety episodes, and one trucker nearly collapsed from dehydration, she stated, her tone steady. But aside from that, it's been orderly. Wolf raised an eyebrow. He walked past her into the warehouse, his boots thudding heavily on concrete. Linda followed, heart racing that he moved like an inspector, observing blankets, noting meal organization, speaking quietly with a soldier who smiled and nodded in her direction. When he stopped before the wall where her father's photograph hung, proud in his dress uniform beneath a faded American flag, his posture shifted slightly. "What unit?" he inquired. 101 SD, Firebase Ripcord. Wolf nodded almost imperceptibly. He served there, lost 2 fingers and most of his hearing. Still returned home and constructed this place. "Your father's identity?" the colonel asked. "Jack Kingston." A pause. "I remember that name." They stood silently, the distant hum of generators now reverberating off the walls. Then he reached into his coat and extracted a government-issued envelope containing crisp currency. "For services provided," he stated, extending it. Linda remained motionless. "I'm not accepting your money. It's not charity." "No," she stated firmly. "It's duty, just as it was his." Wolf hesitated, then withdrew the envelope. "Very well," he said slowly. "What if we arrange an agreement?" She tilted her head, weary. "Listening. Allow the military to utilize this warehouse as a temporary supply station. We'll provide actual beds, medical personnel, provisions, fuel. In exchange, we'll repair the roof, strengthen the insulation, and ensure nobody here freezes before the storm subsides." Linda studied him momentarily, considering. Then she extended her hand. "Agreement." And with that handshake, everything transformed. The transformation occurred rapidly. Military engineers arrived with equipment and supplies. The damaged roof panel over the warehouse was replaced within hours. Fuel containers were delivered by soldiers with truckers assisting in unloading. Veterans from town, hearing about Linda's actions, appeared with flannel shirts, coffee, and quiet willingness to help. One elderly Marine even brought his grandchildren to clear the sidewalks. Jake coordinated vehicle deliveries like a battlefield supply operation. Linda operated the kitchen like a commander. Both soldiers and civilians began addressing her as ma'am with a combination of respect and affection. By nightfall, the warehouse glowed with heating lamps and fellowship. An extended table was established where soldiers played cards beside truckers, and children distributed sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Linda stood in the diner's doorway, hands on her hips, observing the operation function without requiring her intervention. Jake stepped beside her. "You accomplished this?" She shook her head. "He accomplished this," she stated quietly, glancing at her father's picture inside. Jake smiled. "Perhaps, but you revived it." And in that moment, with the storm still raging beyond the gates, Kingston Stop was no longer merely a diner. It was a command center, a sanctuary, and a legacy. The storm had finally yielded. What was once a blinding barrier of ice and wind now extended into an open sky, pale blue and limitless. Snow still blanketed the ground in heavy accumulations, but for the first time in days, sunlight penetrated through the clouds, illuminating the frost-covered world in golden hues. Inside Kingston Stop, the final morning felt like concluding a strange dream. The improvised shelter hummed with quiet energy. Soldiers packed their equipment. Truckers inspected tires, filled tanks, and made departure plans. Several volunteers refolded blankets, cleaned trays, or distributed thermoses of strong, hot coffee. Linda stood behind the counter, back where everything commenced. Her apron was marked with grease and soup. Her hands cracked from cold and constant washing. But her eyes were gentle, her movements calm. A peace existed in her now, the kind that only arrives after accomplishing something meaningful. Jake Morrow was already assisting an elderly veteran secure his vehicle's frozen tarp. He'd spent most of the night loading containers and organizing departures, but still found time to quietly clear the back entrance without being asked. He barely spoke, but his presence had become constant, like the refrigerator's hum or the coffee pot's warm hissing at precisely 8 a.m. The dining area became quiet. Colonel Wolf entered the room's center, flanked by 2 soldiers. For once, his voice wasn't commanding. It was respectful, even gentle. "I understand many of you are prepared to depart," he began, removing his gloves and tucking them under his arm. "And I won't detain you long. But before we leave, something needs to be accomplished. He turned toward Linda. You could have closed your establishment. You could have instructed my men to continue. But instead, you transformed this place into a beacon for soldiers, for truckers, for everyone caught in the storm. He nodded toward one of his assistants, who stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. Years ago, your father was recommended for a medal he never received. It was lost in documentation, buried in red tape. But I served with the men who fought beside him. I understand what he accomplished. And after what you've done here, it seems appropriate that the medal find its home. He opened the box. Inside was a bronze star, gleaming in the morning light. Gasps swept through the crowd. Linda's eyes filled instantly. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the box, her thumb brushing the inscription. She couldn't speak. She didn't need to. Jake stepped forward and saluted her. Others followed. One by one, the soldiers, truckers, and veterans stood and saluted, some rigid and formal, others more casual, but each filled with quiet reverence. Even the youngest volunteer, a teenage girl who distributed peanut butter sandwiches the previous day, stood with her hand over her heart. Linda didn't cry, not exactly, but her chin quivered. And when she finally managed to speak, her voice was raw with gratitude. He always said the war didn't define him. But helping people, that's what made him whole again. Thank you for allowing me to do the same. A few hours later, the convoys began departing. Tires crunched over compacted snow. Engines rumbled. Air brakes hissed like exhaling giants. The Humvees departed in single file, followed by the trucks, each one honking softly as they passed the diner's front window. One final salute. Linda stood outside in her heavy coat, her boots buried in the snowbank, hand raised in farewell. Only one vehicle remained, a flatbed with a metal crew from the Army's engineering unit. They worked quickly and quietly at the lot's corner, installing something in the ground, securing it into the frozen concrete. When they finished, they summoned her. The plaque gleamed bronze, freshly mounted at the foot of her father's old flagpole. She bent down to read the inscription, Kingston Stop, where no one freezes on our watch. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Later that morning, the diner was quiet again. The platforms were removed, the kitchen cleaned, the generator humming low. Everything was still, almost normal. Linda poured herself a mug of coffee and walked outside. The sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows over the snowy road. A pair of trucks passed by, one honking softly as it went. She raised her mug in greeting, smiling at the sound. Then she sat on the bench outside the diner, beside the plaque, her breath a silver ribbon in the cold. She didn't speak. She just listened to the hum of tires on asphalt, to the creak of her father's old sign swaying gently in the wind. In every engine, she heard his voice. In every passing trucker, she saw the life he wanted to build. And in the silence, she found her own legacy, quiet, steady, and enduring. A home for those who serve, a haven for those forgotten, a place where no one is ever left out in the cold. This narrative reminds us that compassion, especially when it's difficult, resonates further than we can imagine. If you were Linda, would you have acted similarly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more tales of everyday heroism. See you in the next video.